Eighth part of the excerpt from Lesson 01 of the online philosophy course by Professor Olavo de Carvalho, March 14, 2009. Before we resume, let me give a warning. A lot of questions are coming in regarding readings and recommended works. Calm down, everyone, for now, you are not supposed to do anything. Just follow the path, do as I am guiding you, and it will all work out in the end. At the beginning, it is not about acquiring philosophical culture is a secondary element. The fundamental goal is to first acquire the philosophical attitude, and only then engage in readings from that attitude. In other words, the initial work must be purely Socratic. You do not see a large number of recommended readings in Socrates' dialogues. What matters there is the dialogue being held at that moment, the interlocutors gaining awareness of the point Socrates is analyzing. That is exactly what we will do here. We will shift your philosophical interest from a kind of cultural and sociological periphery to the very center of your personality. That is what we will do first. Afterward, your readings will stem from that center, and you will see how much more fruitful they will become. This gaining awareness of the ideal self, for instance, of the purpose of your life, of who you want to become when you grow up, is absolutely fundamental. A reading, like any other activity in life, can be conducted from different levels of intensity, depth, attention, etc. Initially, the work is more psychological, or rather, psychopedagogical, than anything else. For now, it is a kind of guidance of the soul, not in the religious sense but in the properly philosophical sense, and that was exactly what Socrates did. Socrates did not tell people to read this or that, to accumulate this or that knowledge. No, the important thing was to center the interlocutor. I know that. In our case, doing this at a distance and without personal contact is very difficult, but it is what we are able to do at the moment, and each of us, both myself and you, will give our best to achieve this result. Of course, I will also recommend some readings, but they will not be readings you must complete by the next class. These will be books that will accompany you throughout the course. They will not always be books nominally about philosophy, but they will be important for the development of your intellectual and human equipment. Going back to the main point, I was discussing the difference between the notion of intellectual authority as Socrates understood it and the notion as it is conceived by the modern educational and media establishment. Socrates believed it was possible to reach a level of knowledge more grounded than mere opinion, and that such knowledge would constitute the source of intellectual authority, not only because it was more grounded and more rational than mere opinion, but because it was something in which he, Socrates, as a concrete person, could truly believe. This issue of believing is nowadays set aside. An individual teaching a scientific discipline, a humanities subject, or even philosophy, does not need to personally believe in what he is saying. He merely needs to perform his social role in front of the students. If he personally believes in completely different things in real life, that does not make any difference. However, this strips his discourse of all real substance, turning it into mere verbalism, self-display, and theater, which is the exact opposite of philosophy. We cannot tolerate that under any circumstance. We can only accept as knowledge that which we not only have sufficient intellectual foundation to believe but in which we can sincerely admit belief, with the whole of our person and from the very center of ourselves. Otherwise, it will not work. That is, our first obligation is to avoid pantomime, to avoid theater, to avoid playing social roles. Nowadays, what is understood as intellectual authority is a collective authority of a certain group of professionals who uniformly subscribe to certain beliefs. I was saying that intellectual authority today is represented by a community of professionals who collectively subscribe to certain beliefs. This does not mean that any of them individually, concretely, must personally believe in what they are saying, because they do not believe in it as a real human being, only as a professional. This means they may act in their personal lives contrary to what they publicly state, and it will not affect the public validity of what they are saying at all. For example, if a scientist believes that global warming is caused by human actions but at the same time personally engages in those very actions that cause global warming, we may criticize him morally. But scientifically this has no significance. The fact that someone acts contrary to his theory does not undermine the theory scientifically. This is precisely one of the characteristics of modern science, as generally understood in academia. It does not require any true personal belief, it only requires belief from a professional standpoint. But if that is the case, it means the results of that science hold little real existential importance for the person who practices it and therefore have little value as guidance for the scientist's real life. This is exactly the opposite of what Socrates sought. Socrates sought a knowledge that was not only rationally grounded, and therefore intrinsically more believable than other types of knowledge, but that had real existential importance for himself. This inseparable synthesis of personal consciousness with the content of knowledge is precisely what defines philosophy. If you break this synthesis and turn philosophy into an academic activity like any other, something you merely teach at a university without personally believing in it, your philosophical speculation will be as superficial for your consciousness as a scientific investigation is for the scientist who practices it. It will become a secondary intellectual activity, something of minor importance, which, even though it might have some social validity, will never have intrinsic authority to judge other types of knowledge. To find a solid basis for judging knowledge in general, we must find what Mario Ferreira dos Santos called the Archimedean point. That point of maximum credibility where a truth is so obvious and self-evident that you cannot forget it even for a single minute. You will see that the search for this Archimedean point is a constant throughout the history of philosophy, sometimes under the name of the search for certainty, or by another name, this firm territory, from which all the knowledge that comes to you can be judged, is fundamental to philosophy, and that is exactly what we seek. The ideal would be for you to reach a level of absolute certainty about certain points, a level of self-evidence, but in most matters, this is not possible. When absolute certainty cannot be attained, we must then seek maximum credibility.